There are obviously a lot of challenges and rewards that were shared by the panelists this morning, and we would like to open up this part of the session for questions. Yes, in fact.
All of you, I think, have mentioned in your presentations at one time or another, what were the things that you found the biggest adjustment or shock when you arrived on site? I'm wondering if you could talk about if you experienced reverse culture shock when you got home, and if so, what brought it on? What were the events or activities that really triggered that?
One of the main things that caused reverse culture shock was definitely the food. When you go back to cat food at your university, it's quite an adjustment after having like some of the best Italian food I've ever had in my entire life in Italy.
Well, my biggest change for reverse culture shock was definitely the time, not the time difference, but rather the people are so laid back in Italy, and coming back here, I was often late for things, and I may have gotten myself in trouble a few times for doing that. But it was definitely having to get back into the American lifestyle of always being on time and just being ready for things, whereas in Italy it was just like, go when you want to go, it's fine. So that was a big thing for me.
I definitely suffered from a lot of reverse culture shock, partly because I went straight from living in London with all these people around me and having something to do all the time to coming back immediately to the States to an internship that I had in Ripon, Wisconsin. So I went from kind of one extreme to the other, where I was in London with something to do, and then just a few weeks later I was in Ripon by myself researching in an archives. So it was just a bit of a change, too fast for me.
For me, it was the fact that when I was in Scotland, I was more independent and in charge of my life than I've ever been before. I come home, I have to eat with my family, or if I'm at school, I have to eat what they serve in the dining hall. I can't just, up and leave whenever I feel like it. So it was more like going from a more adult and independent lifestyle to going back to being a little bit of a kid for a while. And that was really, really difficult.
Well, that was loud. I experienced most of what they were talking about as well, but I think one of the biggest things was going from being in such a large city, Thessaloniki is the second largest city in Greece, to going back to Monmouth, which is a tiny town to me. I mean, it's smaller than my hometown and feels like a little rinky-dink place, but in comparison to Thessaloniki, I had 10 days at home before I had to go back to school, and Monmouth just seems so tiny and it doesn't seem like there's anything to do, whereas in Thessaloniki, there was always something you could find to do.
I definitely experienced culture shock, but kind of in a different way. As soon as I returned from London, I had a day to pack up my bags and head to New York City for an internship right in the heart of Manhattan. And so I thought that my time in a big city like London would totally make me well prepared for New York City, but when I got there, I realized how much different these two huge cities are, and it was a really big cultural adjustment. English aren't necessarily that friendly, but New Yorkers aren't friendly in a much different way. Anyway, it was a big culture shock, and I wasn't prepared for it, so I think that was probably the most difficult part. Also, I got back and went straight to Walmart, which totally threw me through a loop. So I wouldn't recommend going to Europe and coming back and going right to Walmart.
Other questions?
Tequila from Grinnell. So I know some of you took classes while you were abroad, and I was just kind of wondering what kinds of classes you took while you were there.
I took 3.5 classes. I took every student's required to take a British Life and Culture class, which is a lot of fun. You go out and you do different things in museums, and we visited the mosque in London. I took a history class, which was really great. Most of my classes just integrated the museums and life in London. in our history class. It was really great with a woman who is the most prominent lecturer at the British Museum and British Art Museum. So those were kind of the classes that I took.
The school that I attended in Thessaloniki is kind of different. In Greece, they have public universities that every Greek student can go to for free. But the college that I was at is a private institution, and it's about 70% international students and only 30% Greek students, and it's tiny. It's smaller than the school I go to here, so I don't really understand how I managed to find a school smaller than Monmouth. But so the classes I took a Greek class, on a Greek language class, a religion course, one English course where I was the only English major and one of the only 2 people who English was my native language. So it was an interesting course to go from that as an English major at Monmouth to having one English course where we read 3 books the entire semester, and then a sociology class, just because I needed another class. I had to have 12 credit hours. But academically, my semester was a lot different than it is at Monmouth, and that was one of the reverse culture shock things, I suppose, because I was so happy to be back at Monmouth. I had never appreciated my school more than I did this semester when I first got back.
Unlike a lot of study abroad students, the classes I took were fully integrated into a Scottish university, so I was treated as a Scottish student. So I was only able to take classes that other Scottish students took. I took a class in an introduction to aquatic sciences, which is a specialty of the University of Stirling. I took a class on social policy and aging within the UK, and I took a class on Scottish historical figures and how they shape modern Scottish identity.
Well, I'll let Ashley cover Florence, but when I was in London, I took 2 classes, and the first was kind of architecture, art, kind of history of London type thing, and our professor, Sarah, is kind of known for walking really fast, so it was basically power walking through the city of London to see as much as we could in the 8 weeks that we were there. And then my second class in London was a theater class with Rick Millett. And so basically we got to see 2 amazing plays every week. So I was very, very lucky and privileged when I was there.
Well, in Florence, we have our, where we have our classes is Lingua Viva, which is where our Italian instructors are from, Luigi and Elisabetta. And so you take your Italian language, and then you also have a class from the visiting professor, ours was Diane Mockridge, and we learned about the history of Florence basically, and we walked around to all the palaces and everything. It's like, this is where the Medicis were. And then we also had more of an art history class where we spent the majority of our time in museums and looking at pieces of architecture.
Well, I had, of course, an Italian class with Luigi also, who's an interesting fellow. I also had a class on mannerism and art of the 15th century of Janet Smith, who's an amazing woman and makes class fun with her semi-angry lecturing. But and then I had the visiting professor was Ed Burke from Coe College, and he taught a class comparing Augustus's taking of power in taking over the Roman Republic to Lorenzo taking over the Florentine Republic, in comparison of how they did it, which is pretty interesting. And then I had a class in the studio drawing the human body with models, which was also very interesting.
I would like to ask the students to talk about how their international experiences will shape Ripon and Monmouth and Lawrence and Grinnell as it relates to being back on campus, and what types of values and experiences will you add to your campus as a result of you guys having these tremendous experiences for the last semester. If you could address that a little bit.
I've talked a few times about my experiences in Italy. and about my experiences in Italy to some freshman classes, and I've talked about it in my classes and told people, of course, they need to go because it's an amazing experience. And I've convinced a few people to go off campus. I think I take credit for it, but they're probably not give it to me. And also, like, I took a Renaissance class last semester, and I was able to talk about all the art that we talked about in the class, because, or actually this semester, I said last semester, but I was able to talk about all the art, and I was like, I've seen that, and I was like, my art teacher told me this about it, and then I was able to lead discussions and stuff like that. I think that's about it.
Well, mine was a lot like that. One of the major things that I noticed was that I became much more independent and like more of a leader as myself, and I think that like it may have made some changes to my life that I didn't think would. So.
Yeah, my experience is, of course, very similar to Ashley's, where I just feel that my confidence and my level of independence has just completely changed since my experience abroad, and I feel like after studying abroad for 5 months, I really, am truly capable of anything, and I think that studying abroad is, really powerful because it kind of gave me that confidence.
At Grinnell, we pride ourselves on being an international, very internationally oriented school. But when I was applying to go to Scotland, I learned that there were no Grinnell programs in Scotland, so I was kind of a pain in the butt to the off-campus study department, demanding that they allow me to go and add a program in Scotland for other students. And this year, there's another student who's interested in going to Scotland and has applied. So I'd like to think I brought a taste of Scotland back to Iowa and sort of have opened up another international channel for Grinnell students to experience.
I don't know that I'm necessarily going to be able to change the whole of Monmouth and the whole of Monmouth's student body, but I know through my experiences going abroad, I had a different sense of what seems important now that I got back, and like just that shift in perspective. I know I've talked to my close friends about it and a lot of my sorority sisters about it, and I think that just being able to share that perspective will shift their sense of what's important and what they should be focusing on as well. Because I feel that a lot of the time, there are a lot of students who don't focus on things correctly at all in my school, and I'm sure it's true every school, it's not just Monmouth. But I would like to think that I could help change that.
I don't think I mentioned that I went to London through our Lawrence London Center program. So when I returned from London, I applied to be the London Center Student Assistant Coordinator on campus. So I'm very privileged that I get to daily talk to students about going to London, help them get their applications in, host events promoting the program, and host events getting alumni from the London Center together just to talk about our experiences and how we can improve the program. And it's great just having meetings, orientation meetings with these students and getting them prepared to go, and just kind of assuring them that they're going to have a really awesome experience like I did. So that's how I'm doing that.
Other questions from the audience?
Yes, a couple of you mentioned coffee. and I remember for myself discovering coffee, good coffee, when I was abroad, as I mentioned yesterday, and it changed the way it changed my drinking habits when I got back. One of you also mentioned whiskey, and I'm curious, I remember myself discovering alcohol and things about alcohol that I didn't know before I was abroad. Do you have any thoughts or observations for their discoveries that you made too about alcohol while you were abroad? It's a topic.
Well, I went to London, so alcohol was, it's a part of the culture. Pubs are, they're everywhere. But alcohol and pubs, it is a part of the culture, and you go, it's a social event. And it's interesting talking to my professors because alcohol is just a much different topic in Europe and in London than it is in the United States. You know, I mean, students drink when they're 14, 15 years old, but it was rare to find people stumbling out onto the curb hungover or sick from the alcohol that they drink, because it's more of a social event, less than a binge drinking young thing. So that was interesting, and you know, I was probably one of the greatest parts of the culture is kind of seeing how people can drink responsibly and admiring that part of the London culture.
Well, I discovered that I don't like Greek alcohol. Like, ouzo is kind of disgusting to me, as is a Turkish alcohol called raki. It's about 90% alcohol and it tastes like tequila. And sometimes they gave us a free shot of it at one of the bars I was at, and they didn't inform me that there was an ice cube in the shot glass. And I mean, it's a shot glass and I can't see through it, so I'm gonna take it like a shot, and I almost choked on an ice cube and died. And like, that was my discovery about alcohol. I don't like Greek alcohol.
I was the one who mentioned whiskey because as a part of one of my program-sponsored trips, we got to tour a distillery. That's what the picture was. We actually took those shots at 11 in the morning. And I learned that, of course, Scottish whiskey is a big part of culture, but I just didn't know how big. 80% of the Scotch made in Scotland is exported. And they're very secretive about making it. When we took a tour of the distillery, we had to put away our cell phones and cameras. The girls weren't allowed to open their purses. And they were very, very strict on that rule. And they didn't even show us some of the rooms. So trade secrets and everything, it sort of plays into the Scottish pride as well. And also interesting you mentioned coffee, because in Britain they drink a lot of tea, and I missed really good coffee while I was gone, and the first morning back I drank an entire pot of it myself. So I really did not have a good coffee experience when I was abroad.
I did not have a good coffee experience when I was abroad either, which is kind of surprising because like it's Italy and espresso and it's so great. But I will admit I'm super American. Like, all I wanted was an iced coffee when I was in Florence. That's all I wanted. So this happened more than one occasion too. I would go into a cafe and they would have a Cafe Freddo on their menu, which is supposed to be cold coffee. And so we were there in January and February, and I would try to order a Cafe Freddo, and the waiter would just look at me and say, "It's the wrong season for that," and not let me order what I wanted. So I was a tad bit disappointed.
I loved the coffee, I'm not gonna lie. Loved it. But as for alcohol in Italy, especially in Florence, there's a lot of international students studying there. And I know that Luigi had talked to us about how the people that live in Florence like really do not like American students because they tend to go and get plastered and then, you know, get in trouble out in the streets. And we recognize that. We'd go to bars and stuff like that, and if we came out and we were being loud, we would get in trouble by the Italian people, and they're not afraid to tell you that you're doing something wrong. So it's much more of a social thing. You don't drink to get drunk, you drink because it's socially acceptable.
Yeah, I talked about coffee already, so I'll go to alcohol. I really never had red wine other than like really bad red wine before I went to Italy. And I didn't really know the difference between like a Chianti or a Merlot. And I went wine tasting once, and I went to a wine distillery. Winery, why can't I think of that? A winery once, and that was interesting. And like she talked about the drinking habits and how they wouldn't get drunk. And I was going to say something else. One sec. But I had grappa, which was interesting. It's like a hard, I think it's a grape liqueur. And I had limoncello, which was also good. And I was going to say something else, but I forgot, so let's go on.
Other questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi, I am Amelia from Knox, and Catherine from Grinnell talked about the paradigm shift she experienced, and I just wanted to know if any of the rest of you guys really experienced a shift from comparing your newfound country to life in the U.S. to actually forgetting that comparison and moving on to just viewing it as a new experience in itself? And if that occurred for you, when it occurred throughout the time there, if that makes sense.
Well, I know that the first month or so that I came back from Italy, I was constantly comparing everything in the American way of life to the Italian and how Italians were so superior, and I felt that like I was so much more cultured than anybody else because I hadn't gone to Italy, and like it was very different for me because when I first went to Italy, I was just like, what are they doing? This is so wrong. But then when I came back, I thought Americans were doing it wrong. So it was definitely a different experience for me, but I now realize that like the cultures like just are so different, and you have to try to figure out a way of which lifestyle you want to live.
Me personally, it was a really nice experience abroad. Like, I feel like from the first day, I was kind of already starting my transition of going back to life in America, because I went from living in Florence for 11 weeks to spending a week in Paris and then spending 8 weeks in London. And obviously, like, London is way more like America than Florence or Paris. So I kind of went from like one extreme, like one European extreme, kind of with Paris as like the middle point, and then London was that much closer to America that I was kind of more able to transition easily.
I did speak a little about my paradigm shift. To clarify, it was really a paradigm shift entirely about Scotland and comparing my first experience, which was more touristy and played more into Scottish stereotypes, as opposed to my second experience in Scotland, where I got to see other aspects of Scottish culture. For instance, stand-up comedy is huge in Scotland. It's considered one of the best places in Europe to view and perform stand-up, and I didn't even know that before I went there. So finding out more what it means to be a modern Scot, and that you don't run around in a kilt all the time drinking scotch, was really the paradigm shift I experienced.
I can't really pinpoint when it changed from me being like, oh, this is so different than America, to it's just Greece. You know, well, not, no, it's just Greece, but that's how they do things here. But I do know that I noticed it when my parents came. My parents came at the end of my semester, and for the next 2 weeks, I listened to my mom go, wait, why are they doing that? What are they doing? And I was just like, that's what they do. I don't really know. Like, that's just how it is. They park on the sidewalk and they drive like maniacs. It's just how it happens. It's not better or worse. It's just, it is what it is.
When I arrived in London, we actually got a long laundry list from our coordinator about the things that are different and how to get over them fast, because, you know, they just kind of wanted us to get acclimated. You know, like when you go to a restaurant and they take the food off your table when you're done. That doesn't happen in London. The food sits in front of you. The waiter doesn't attend to you because they want to leave you alone. The dogs are extremely well trained in the park, and they just walk around, you know, along with their owners everywhere. So when I returned home to, actually I went to New York and stayed with family, and they had a new puppy, and it was a terror, and I was appalled. What are you doing? Why is your dog not trained like, you know, the British train their dogs? So there were a lot of criticisms when I returned, and, you know, I mean, they evened out eventually, but I think anytime you go somewhere, you're going to have criticisms of either culture.
Took me a while to think about that. I would say that in Italy you have to be a host mom, or when you got into your host family, like you started to really feel integrated. Before that, when we were in the pensione, it felt more like a vacation, but when you got in a host family and you started talking Italian regularly and eating Italian food, and not talking to Ben, who is the pensione, half Italian, half Brit, who liked Italy because the food was better. And when I got back, it kind of eased through, because I had two friends who went the semester before, which is the reason I went, and I would just talk about Italy and not like go, this food's horrible, or I wish I could go get a cappuccino right now. So that kind of helped me ease back in, I guess.
Other questions?
Yes.
oceans and like compost or like carrying water on your head. So I wonder, but like you all said that these new experiences were so formative. And over the past couple days, I've heard people say, "Oh, I want to go back. I want to go back." And I wonder, like, why do you want to go back? Like where you went already, or do you not? Like, does like being in Paris make you want to go to like, you know, Johannesburg or something? You know, like what? Does that make sense?
Florence is a beautiful city, and like the Italians and the Italian culture. I kind of fell for it, I guess, and how everything's relaxed. But I would like to go elsewhere. There's a lot of places I didn't go. Like I didn't get to Sicily, which I would love to go to. I didn't get to Milan, which I would love to go to. So I would say Italy in general I would like to go back to. I don't really care where.
Well, I am already planning a trip back to Florence, but I think one of the big things is like just experiencing new experiences. Like I am more than willing to go anywhere in the world now. I never wanted to go to Asia once in my life before, and now, you know, it's a possibility. So like it's just experiencing new experiences that I want to go back to, and like learning new things. It's just a passion that I have now, traveling and stuff.
Like, I really want to travel elsewhere in Europe, obviously. But I really want to go back to Florence and London with new people, just so I can kind of share the knowledge that I found about these cities and the passion that I found in these two cities with other friends and family, so I can kind of, you know, share what I learned with other people.
I definitely want to go back to Scotland. I love it so much there, and I fit in really well there. But it also seems that each time I go there, I'm a little bit older, I'm somewhere else in my life, and that leads to me discovering new things about Scotland and about myself. So I know if I go back after I graduate college, I'll have a completely different experience that will help me learn even more about Scottish culture, which is something I just love.
I might be the only person to say this, but I don't necessarily want to go back to Thessaloniki right now. It's not that it was like a bad place. I did have an amazing experience. But being abroad really changed how I view America. And my idea of going to Europe, I expected to get to Europe and it was going to be like this magical place. And in all reality, it's just another place where people live. There are beautiful things. I saw amazing things, but it's, once again, just a place that has different people. It's a different culture, but it's not as though everything's magically better. Like I didn't feel, like I didn't get there and immediately feel as though everything was fixed, and there were a lot of problems in that culture that I see in this culture as well. And those are the things that I would like to be able to change here. Like, yes, I would like to travel more and see more beautiful places and beautiful things, but there's no burning desire for me to be back in Greece right now. I'm loving being home, absolutely loving it. But yeah.
I traveled a lot when I was in London. I went to Spain and Norway and Sweden and Paris and some other places. And so I would definitely love to go back. And, you know, I think I told you in my presentation, my family has always taken me on a lot of different travel excursions. So traveling is a big part of my life and things that I would like to do. But as every professor told me in London, you know, they would point something out on our tours around the city and they would say, so when you come back here, because you will come back here, and it's true, London for me became like a second home, and it still feels like a home when, you know, I see students that I helped go over and they send me pictures and I say, I was just on that corner, and it really does feel like I kind of grew up there in a sense, but you know, it was 10 weeks, but it does feel like home, and I think if I went back, it would be more like going back home than going to a country that I was in for 10 weeks.
Other questions?
This is addressed especially to those of you who visited the UK. We had a talk last night, which was meant to be humorous and maybe a bit provocative, but I wonder if you have any thoughts from your experience compared to the way the talk on the English was presented last night.
It was a little bit harsh, but in all reality, it was pretty spot on. The whole animal thing, I mean, that's how you communicate to the British, is you talk to their animals. The food thing, I mean, it's hilarious. It really, I mean, he really did pinpoint the culture. And I think the best part about that, and you know, it was definitely funny, but the best part about that was you realized how different it is from American culture. If you think about how much we love food and we love to talk about food. And yes, our animals are important, but we love face-to-face contact, especially being from the Midwest. I mean, you just want to talk to people, and that's just not how things go in the UK. And when you're on the tube, and you're not talking to other people unless you are a foreigner, and then they know you're a foreigner, and you don't want to put yourself out like that. So, yeah, he was spot on.
Scotland is a totally different experience from England. I can tell you that much right now. In one of my guidebooks, it said, never call a thistle a rose, meaning that you never call a Scot English because he'll get very mad. They take pride in being Scottish. Scottish people, generally, it's a more working class country. They're much more outgoing. You would know that if you've ever been to a Scottish ceilidh, which is absolutely wild and so much fun. Everyone's very friendly. And he complained about the food. I have no idea what he was talking about. I ate very well in Scotland. It's just you have to know what to look for, and maybe it's just because I have very Scottish taste. I like meat and potatoes, savory, not very spicy food. But I can safely say Scottish people are much friendlier, they're much open. They have what I call Midwestern values. They're very friendly, they're very face-to-face. So when he said it's kind of like all the same, I got a little miffed, if you will.
For me, personally, it was just really super awesome to see Rick talk last night, because obviously, like, he was one of my professors in London, so, you know, his dry sense of humor and just his personality that came through in the talk last night really reminded me why I loved him as a professor when I was abroad. But I can definitely relate to travel on the tube and everyone being really stoic. And it's kind of funny because that's exactly how I am when I travel in the States. So I fit right in on the tube, which was awesome.
Well, I didn't go to England, but I had two experiences with the English. First was Ben, who was in charge of the pensione. He was half English, half Italian, and he told us I chose to go where the food was better. And I was like, what about fish and chips? He's like, one thing does not make an entire country's cuisine. And was very adamant about his choice in living in Italy. And also when Manchester United came to play, and there's SWAT teams everywhere, and everything was closed down because they had quite a reputation for pounding back some ales and getting a little rowdy if the game didn't go their way. So that was interesting.
Yes.
Follow-up question. Yeah, this panel, more than any of the others, has talked about personal transformation that you found through study abroad. And I'm wondering if you could talk, and you also spoke about the coursework that you did on each of your programs. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the ways that the coursework that you did facilitated or enhanced that personal transformation, or not, and vice versa. The way the personal transformation that was going on enhanced the academic work that you did. Were there connections, or were they just two parallel tracks?
It's kind of tough to think about real quick, but what I can think about is the Italian class especially, was you learned a lot about the culture. Luigi would tell us things, like start every sentence with Laura. If you want to sound Florentine, he would tell us, don't walk around barefoot because you're stepping on a needle. But other than that, I don't think on it.
Well, I guess like most of the class, well, all of the classes we were actually walking around in the city for. We went to Palazzo Medici, or We went to like every palace in Florence, and it was amazing, and we actually learned while we were there, and it was a new experience for me to actually be in a place that you're learning about and like feeling it is very different for me, and I feel like I learned so much better doing that, and so.
For me, once again, I go back to London. Just the format of our theater course really required us to be independent, super independent, because like I said, we were visiting, 2 theaters a week, seeing 2 plays a week. Obviously, we were given the tickets to the plays in class. We were sometimes given, a small map. But other than that, it was really up to us to get there on time and be responsible adults and, find our way to the theater and really do everything ourselves. It's not like we traveled together as a class. We were really, each of us were responsible for doing well in that class.
In my classes, I was responsible for choosing what I read, or if I read that week, and that really just helped kind of put me in a mindset that I'm in charge of my own education. It's a ship that I'm sailing. And my class on aging in society opened my eyes to just the problem of ageism, not in the UK, but also in the US. So now that I'm back here stateside, I can understand that there are a lot of problems for the elderly, drawing on what I learned about it. And I feel like that's something a lot of people just don't think about, so I'm very grateful to that class.
I think as far as the academics this past semester go with shaping my growth, it made me realize how much I actually like school, because I love being back in Monmouth where I actually have to think during my classes, not to sound harsh to the Greek semester, but academically it was a joke. Well, actually I do need to sound harsh, it was terrible. But I really didn't gain much from being there academically, except for the fact that I know what I like, and I like school.
The Lawrence London Center has its own professors who have been in London teaching with our students for many, many years. So in a sense, I got my special Lawrence liberal arts education in London, which was a really, really great way to learn. And they just kind of facilitated an experiential type of learning. So most of my classes were walking tours throughout the city. Our assignments were to go find a piece in the Victorian Albert Museum and to sit in front of it for X amount of time and analyze every little bit of it, and then to go to another museum across the city, say the British Museum, and find something that reminded us of that other piece. So it really influenced going out in the city, but in a very liberal arts kind of way, which was really special. So yeah, it was a great experience.
Well, this is the last question, and then we'll need to wrap it up.
So the first group spoke a lot about our identity as international students. Our students are very privileged coming from institutions where you pay a lot of money to go to these places all over the world and study there, and how we struggle with, studying people, doing independent research and things like that. You as a group, how do you feel about it, and did you have that privilege and categorization and Western ideals in you when you were coming to Europe, and how did that change or did not change?
I guess my experience and where I live, there is a university right down the street that we got to go, and like I said, I participated in the yoga club and other things, and there was a student bar, so we really got to interact with other British students, and they're not super fond of Americans, and they don't necessarily have a great picture of us in their mind. So my accent was made fun of a lot, and they found out I was from Kentucky. There was a lot of cow jokes and did you marry your brother kind of thing. So it was hard getting past those boundaries. I remember I was in line for a museum and we were in the queue, and these 2 people in front of us that were complaining about Americans. Oh, Americans, they would have destroyed this place, those terrible, terrible, terrible Americans. And the guy's like, these are Americans. Americans behind us, like, you need to, be quiet. And I was like, it's okay. We are terrible sometimes. And so you just kind of had to make that leap. You had to recognize and kind of accept that stereotype and just try to get past it, and just try to fit in with the British.
I actually kind of had the opposite experience most of the time when people found out that we were Americans, especially at ACT, this school I was at. The Greek students wanted to come and hang out with the Americans. They wanted to go out to the bars with a lot of the people in my program and get kind of crazy. But even people on the streets, when they found out that you didn't speak Greek or that you only knew English, they would ask where you were from, and they would be very, very kind about it and say that they wanted to go to the States too, and they wanted to see it. And it was almost, a lot of that culture almost seemed like hyper westernized sometimes. Like they wanted to do these incredibly westernized things. But, so I didn't really get a sense of like, they didn't like the Americans being there, more so that they wanted to come to America too. Not all Greek people, obviously. I'm not saying they wanted to leave their culture and didn't love their culture. But just that there were certain things about American and Western culture that they really liked.
My experience actually forced me to confront my own privilege, even though I was in a fully developed nation. Because Scotland has traditionally been economically oppressed by England throughout history, even now, it's a much more blue-collar country. And so a lot of the students I met came from families where sending them to school, even though tuition is free in Scotland, was a stretch. And it forced me to confront my own habits of consumerism when dealing with smaller cars, smaller houses. Just everything was a lot more downsized. It was more like, do you really need this? So even though I was in a very Western country, my American ideals of bigger is better were constantly challenged.
Just being like an American student in Florence, it was kind of interesting because we were taking Italian classes, so it was kind of interesting to walk into a store or a cafe and for me to try to speak Italian to whoever was working and for them to speak English back to me. So that was it was just kind of weird because I was trying to, use my Italian and, learn their culture, and I think whether they were trying to do the same thing to me, but they were speaking English back at me. So it was just kind of this weird balance that I kind of had to learn to deal with.
I think the Italians love and hate Americans. I know, like, for all the women on the trip that we went to, you would get proposed marriage every time you walked on the street because you were American and they knew you were American by everything. One of our friends that went, she was a short redhead, very light skin. Every moment on the street, she was being catcalled and everything. So, like, in that aspect, they definitely thought that, like, American women were, woo, crazy. But they also, when, like, we'd go into stores and everything, we had one place where every time we went in, they'd teach us Italian. So, there's different people there, just like here. There are some people that love traveling and there are others that aren't. So, it's just...
I think your question is about like Western influence, and one thing is when you have the Protestant work ethic as we do as Americans of efficiency, you go to Italy, it's not very efficient. Try going through the post office and being sent 10 different places, and then the person telling you you have to come back tomorrow, and you're like, what just happened? I want to send a package, not get sent around. Or the fact that they're Berlusconi power, but we won't get into that. But it's kind of a change, and like you have to expect things not to be done quickly, and kind of expect that people aren't going to jump and do work 24/7 and try work hard. People will just disappear, go in a shop and no one's there. The person's like, I'm on a coffee break. But I think that's...
Well, I'd like to thank the panelists, and I certainly hope that your experiences abroad have transformed you in terms of your worldviews and also that it will also help you to greatly influence the campus culture of all of your institutions. If we could give them a hand, thank you.